Coming up on Theater Talk.
Shakespeare hung out with
At
the
Sardi's.
Sardi's of his day. That was the kind of guy he probably was in London. Maybe he put on the sour face when he went back home to the provinces and
to the wife and the kids and the family, but when he was having a good time, you think, when he was in London.
Which is why he always rented here and bought there.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. And Susan, there is a terrific new book out, Shakespeare in America, an anthology from the Revolution to contemporary times, edited by my old Columbia University professor, James Shapiro, and our Shakespeare expert. Welcome to Theater Talk, as always.
Great to see
Welcome
you.
back to Theater Talk.
Thank you, Susan. Great
Yeah,
to see you.
I just love this book, and it's a wonderful idea to capture Shakespeare's impact in America. What got you thinking about this?
Everybody's talking about global Shakespeare.
Right.
There's a production of the Globe Theater right now going to every country, including North Korea.
And we've had a lot of Shakespeare here in New York, the Twelfth Night from the old Mark Rylance's production and all that stuff.
Everybody's coming in, and I thought, I've always loved Shakespeare, and I think he's the same everywhere.
Yeah.
And I've been going to England since I was a teenager, roughing it, going to see plays in London and Edinburgh Festival. So I always kind of collapse the difference between British Shakespeare and American Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, though, it's really a different phenomenon, from the American musical to how we look at Shakespeare to Papp's public theater Shakespeare.
That very, what's the word I want to say, not working class Shakespeare, but the accessible Shakespeare to the common man, to the working class New Yorker.
That's it. So America's a different kind of beast than England or Britain. Mm-hmm. And I thought, why not spend a couple of years thinking about what impact Shakespeare's had on America and what kind of story 200 some odd years of Shakespeare in America tells.
Mm-hmm. So take us in the beginning. When is the sort of the earliest traces of Shakespearean productions here in America? Do we know?
We do. It was a kind of iffy thing, in part because the people who came over to settle this country were Puritans in the North, and
they didn't like the theater.
They hated the theater. No Shakespeare allowed whatsoever. Right. We're shutting down the theater, and this stuff is not going to work here. Mm-hmm. And then we broke with England. Mm-hmm. So why would we want to take in their national poet as our own, insofar as we're creating our own national culture and literature? Yeah. And so it was nip and tuck. And it wasn't until the end of the 19th century that writers like Willa Cather, who's reading Shakespeare, as a teenager, loves it, reviewing it, ends up saying he has two countries now in which he is the great national poet.
It was wonderful that in the 19th century there were touring companies of Shakespeare through the Old West, and it really was something that people could share that no other writer had before that time.
That's probably why Shakespeare thrived in 19th century America. There wasn't a body of American plays, let alone musicals, let alone burlesques, that you could take on the road. So early on in the early 19th century, late 18th century, there were production companies touring, and it caught on. And it was across the nation, whether it was mining camps in California or in Nebraska where Willa Cather's writing, or my favorite story in the whole collection is when Ulysses S. Grant got to rehearse the part of Desdemona in Corpus Christi, Texas, before they invaded Mexico. So you can't make a lot of these stories up. No. And it becomes an alternative version of American history, at least an alternative to the version I was force-fed.
I want to take it back a little further, though, to going to the Founding Fathers, though. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, these were extremely well-educated men. They knew world literature. Did Shakespeare have an impact on them at all?
He did. Jefferson and Adams went to Shakespeare's birthplace, and somebody hustled them and sold them a splinter of the chair that Shakespeare sat in. There were 47 chairs they were carving splinters out of. And Adams' wife said, he cherished this relic. You could have made this a collection about American presidents in Shakespeare. And Bill Clinton very graciously
wrote the
forward to this book, and he loved Shakespeare and he quoted Shakespeare, in part because these presidents are people who live under pressure, and nobody writes about people under pressure better than Shakespeare.
Nobody writes about politicians better than Shakespeare.
That is true too, and you get these moments in American history. Lincoln sitting in the White House during the Civil War, reading Not to Be or Not to Be, but the guilty speeches of Hamlet's uncle in that play. And just think, this really must have touched them. Why is he quoting Claudius? You know, just those kind of questions, or Richard III.
You know, something I learned about reading your anthology was 165 years ago, the Astor Place Shakespeare riots. Now, what was that about?
There are very few things that Americans have killed each other over.
Yes.
The Revolution was one of those moments. Civil War was the most terrible of those moments. And people have died fighting over civil rights in the South and a number of other issues. But I don't know another writer who has caused Americans to fire on, kill, and wound fellow Americans. 1849, as you say, there was a British actor named William Macready, who was playing Macbeth not far from where we sit at the Astor Place Theater. And young louts, probably just like I was a young lout growing up in New York, who didn't like this highbrow British invasion and really preferred American Shakespeare. And his rival, the great American actor, probably the first native-born American actor who reached that status, Edwin Forrest, was playing Macbeth across town. And they wanted American Macbeth, not British Macbeth. And, you know, they just picked up cobblestones and started trashing whatever they could. The guard was called out. The crowd was fired on.
Somebody compared it to Altamont with me. It was like the Hells Angels running in
You know,
to have a fight, but it happened to be about Shakespeare.
It gives you a sense of how much people just cared about Shakespeare. I mean, who's
wanted to
willing
fight, yeah.
to fight to the death over Shakespeare?
And 20 people were killed, right?
20 killed, about 100 injured, and it left a deep scar, I think, on the theater culture of New York.
One of the wonderful photographs in the book, and also an essay, is about Orson Welles and the famous Voodoo Macbeth. You have a fabulous picture, which I hope you can drop in, of the Voodoo Macbeth. Tell us the story, if you will, of that.
Sure. Most people don't realize that Orson Welles was probably the greatest interpreter, and I mean across the board, scholars, actors, throwing everybody into the mix, the greatest interpreter of Shakespeare in the first half of the 20th century, maybe in the 20th century, and especially as a young man. And he had just had the success with his famous fascist Julius Caesar,
Right.
where the Sin of the Poet scene really captured fascist hooligans killing somebody they distrusted. Modern dress production. I love giving talks in New York, and there's always somebody in the second row. I always ask, who here saw Orson Welles' Julius Caesar? And when the hands go up, I seek them out afterwards and talk about that production.
Yeah.
Fewer people that I've spoken with were there for Voodoo Macbeth, which was up in Harlem. And it was one of the great adaptations of Shakespeare in this country, a voodoo Macbeth. Wells using an African-American cast, and there are pictures of the throngs in Harlem rushing to see this.
And the story goes, maybe apocryphal, that there was a critic who panned it, and the real witch doctors, voodoo doctors in the show, they did some voodoo ceremony, and the critic supposedly dropped dead of a heart attack.
He did indeed.
It's a true story, then.
And I think that should be a good warning to every critic who's going to criticize a Shakespeare production that's not quite what they expect.
What is your couple of your particular favorite entries in this?
One is, I didn't know about it at all, Jane Addams. Jane Addams, first American woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what I've always thought about. Hull House in Chicago. She has a real patriarchal dad who dies. He wouldn't let her go to college back east. He was controlling. And she came from the aristocracy of Chicago. And one other member of that Chicago aristocracy was a man named Pullman. Pullman made railroad coaches and cars, and he created a little city called Pullman, and he required all his workers to live there, and pay him gas, utilities, and when he laid a bunch of them off, he didn't lower their rent, and They were either going to starve or fight. So there was
Riot.
a riot, a revolt. And Pullman felt the man more sinned against than sinning. And Jane Addams and others went to talk to him, and he just said, you know, they're not showing me the kind of respect that a leader of my greatness deserves. And the president called in the troops because this affected our national railroad and transportation mail systems, and they violently suppressed this riot. And she wrote a brilliant essay called A Modern Lear, in which she talks about what happens when the 1% are controlling our lives. And she writes about Pullman as King Lear, and as a tragic man who thinks he is maligned and doesn't understand his relationship.
And who's out of touch.
Who is completely out of touch. And it's a story, King Lear gets rewritten as a late 19th century story about industrial action and violence. It's a killer story, and I love it.
We should touch, although briefly, though, on Joe Papp, because he very significant in making Shakespeare a part of this city, really, and making it accessible for all.
I agree. I have to say that putting together this volume changed my thinking about Shakespeare and what Papp was able to do, insisting that the people on the stage reflect the people in the audience. And I'm now advising productions at the Public Theater, and we took a production into Rikers Island just a few months ago, Much Ado, terrific production. Watching inmates forget that they are incarcerated for 95 minutes while watching Much Ado, and watching them respond in a way that's probably closer to how Shakespeare's audiences responded. You know, when hero collapses, they all rush up, she's down, she's down. You realize what Papp created, something that just doesn't reach aristocrats or rich people on the east side or west side, but can dig down and touch so many lives in the city.
He took several beatings, though, for some of those Shakespeare productions by the critics over there. I remember John Simon, in particular, was really rough on the non-traditional casting and all that stuff back then.
And Frank Rich.
Yeah, you've got it.
I love Frank Rich as a writer. Yeah. He tried taking Joe Papp on in the New York Times.
Yep, it's
and
in
the Times gave Papp, you know, last punch. And it was, you know, let's just say Americans are pretty contentious and argumentative. Theater gets to be, that's the nature of creativity, conflict, and that's the nature of Shakespeare's plays is conflict.
Well, it's a great book, Shakespeare in America, an anthology from the Revolution to now, edited by our good friend James Shapiro.
And it's worth the price as the book alone to read the wonderful panel discussion between Jerome Robbins, Stephen Sondheim, and Arthur Lawrence in 1985 when they speak about how they harmoniously put together West Side Story, probably the greatest musical.
I call that piece Rashomon.
Yes.
That all three of them got along, though, was sort of amazing because they didn't get along very often. So it's out from the Modern Library, too, a really handsome...
Not Modern Library, Library of America.
I'm sorry, Library of America. They give you a very handsome book jacket.
They did a beautiful job.
I love, by the way, this picture of Shakespeare's. Do you have a particular favorite portrait of Shakespeare? Is this?
This right now is, because it's on the cover of my book.
Spoken like a good publicity machine, which Shakespeare was too, right?
He wouldn't have survived otherwise.
Okay.
Oh, let me not be mad. Not mad. Sweet heaven. Keep me in temper. I would not be mad.
We have our favorite Shakespearean scholar here.
Well, he's not my favorite because my favorite is my husband.
My favorite and her second favorite.
You're my second.
I'm happy to be second.
Are you happy to be second?
Very happy.
James Shapiro, who has written a number of extraordinary books about Shakespeare and his plays. His latest book is The Year of Lear, Shakespeare in 1606, out from Simon & Schuster. Welcome back to Theater Talk.
It's great to be back.
Good. What is going on in Shakespeare's life that inspires him or drives him to write these plays at this particular time?
We like to think of Shakespeare as writing 2 plays a year, steadily churning out hit after hit. Like every writer, he had good years and bad years. And he had a stretch of pretty bad years since Hamlet at the turn of the century.
He had flops.
You know, he's struggling to find his footing under a new regime after Queen Elizabeth dies in 1603. And I'm sure the young bucks of the Elizabethan and Jacobean theater were saying, he's washed up. You know, he's the Neil Simon of his day. Right. Yeah, he was great then, but he keeps churning out those comedies that are past sell-by date. And In 1606, which turned out to be a terrible year in England, Shakespeare finds his stride and knocks out three of the greatest tragedies in the language.
Yeah. And what's going on in England? We've got the new regime, King James I, replacing someone that I always get the sense from your books Shakespeare really liked a lot, Elizabeth I.
I think Shakespeare did like Elizabeth. One of the nice things about becoming a playwright during the last year of a childless queen's reign is you get to knock out succession play after succession play. Who's going to be the new ruler in Titus? Who's going to rule at the end of Hamlet? Shakespeare feasted on that story. And King James comes in, he's got two sons and a daughter. That story's over. I mean, it's good for Shakespeare that one of the first things King James does when he comes into England is looks at Shakespeare's company, sees that it's the best one of the land, and says, you are the king's men.
Right.
Mixed blessing means you play court all the time. The downside is you're playing at court all the time instead of making money at the Globe.
Right, that's because the king is not paying Shakespeare to perform for him?
You don't pay a lot. I don't know how much Obama pays when you come to the White House, but it may be expenses. They may send a limo. That's the Jacobean equivalent.
We have a new regime, but we also have a plague raging in the city at this time.
Plague had struck England in 1603, the same year that Elizabeth died and King James came in, and swept away 1 out of 7 paying customers, so to speak, at the Globe. It just devastated London. And it came back in 1606 and ended up closing the theaters in late summer and early fall. But two other things happened that were worse. One was the fallout from the gunpowder plot. And
tell us about that.
Sure. In early November of 1605, a group of disaffected Catholic gentry decided, we want regime change. We want to restore the old faith. Let's kill King James, blow up Parliament, eliminate the ruling class, the religious leaders, the political leaders in one terrific explosion. And they were caught at the last minute. And the first few months of 1606 were spent in a kind of public spectacle that probably pulled people out of the theaters into the street because these individuals were dismembered, hanged for a bit.
This was the entertainment of the day.
People flocked to see that stuff. Every Catholic was suspected at this point. Are they fifth columnists? Who's to be trusted? Do we take away children from Catholics and raise them in Protestant households? So there was real turmoil.
In 1606, we're in a period like now where there's religious conflict. And you have a king who believes in witches, and yet all these competing religions which lead to Shakespeare's plays in a way.
All this stuff feeds right into Shakespeare's work.
Yes.
King James also, since he was a Scot, wanted to unite England and Scotland. He couldn't be king of two nations. He said, it's like being a bigamist. Right. And he's standing before Parliament and saying, I can't be married to two wives. Let's just unite.
Right.
And what he did was create an identity crisis where there wasn't one.
Yes, people didn't want to unite.
And Shakespeare must be thinking, thank God, because I specialize in identity crises. As bad as it got for England, it got much better for Shakespeare.
So for King Lear, which is about a man who's got to divide up his kingdom, this is ripped from the headlines of the day in some ways.
It's a brilliant play. And most people don't know it, but there had been a play of King Lear that had been on the stage for 15 years.
Right.
And it was just published in the summer of 1605.
Different spelling, though. L-E...
L-E-I-R.
Right.
But he was really kind of ripping it off.
He was absolutely, if there were lawyers and
right. Copyrights.
You don't want to go there.
Right.
So he reads this whole play, which wonderfully has the king and his 3 daughters and a happy ending.
Yes.
Yeah.
King Lear is restored to his daughter Cordelia. Everybody's alive at the end. Thank God. So what Shakespeare does is take this story and turn it into the bleakest, most tragic story imaginable. And it really spoke to the time. So he's taking an Elizabethan play and doing a gut renovation and turning it into a Jacobean one. And that's, Shakespeare didn't make up plots. He saw what others didn't do really well, saw the potential of old plays that were out of fashion, and figured out, okay, this is my chance. This is how I'm going to turn it and make this thing live again.
Now, the third play you deal with is Anthony and Cleopatra. And what is behind that? What's on Shakespeare's mind when he decides to write that story?
King James had been in power for 3 years, and he was this virile king, liked hunting, didn't like governing very much, liked spending money, bankrupting the country. He kind of realized soon that it's not Christmas every day, as he put it. I understand that. And when Elizabeth was aging, people were just tired, as they said, of the old woman. They wanted to be governed by a guy. Yeah. Hillary, I hope, is listening as we speak. And one of the things that happened was 3 years into the reign of King James, who was clearly going to live for a while, they realized this guy is not the one we wanted. And there were no elections back then every 4 years. You were stuck with a king until the day he died. And Anthony and Cleopatra, which celebrates this great queen, is a story in a lot of ways that speaks to, it's not just Shakespeare, everybody, Dekker, others, playwrights at the time, are writing nostalgia for the old
lady.
The old lady. We wish we had her back.
Now, does King James, is he aware? I mean, I guess we don't know, but do you think he's watching this play and thinking, what's Shakespeare really saying about me here? Or is he, it's fun and Cleopatra's cute?
James was probably the smartest person and the most best-selling author ever to rule in England.
Yeah, the Bible.
And one of the really great things that he did this year was he wanted the spot in Westminster Abbey where Queen Elizabeth had herself buried in the tomb of her grandfather, Henry VII. So he ordered her dug up and dumped into this side area where all these virgin queens, including two of his own princess virgin daughters who died, were placed. And he reserved that spot for himself. So he's playing his own little game about who is supplanting and who is replacing Elizabeth.
What happened to Queen Elizabeth?
You know what happened to her?
What?
She and her sister Mary was a Catholic, never quite got along.
Yeah.
They dumped her bones on Mary's, planted this tomb on top. King James had this really tongue-in-cheek little Latin plaque said, they're happy together in posterity. It's just unbelievable.
Have they fixed that? Have they fixed that?
That's the way it is.
It's still
to this
there.
day.
And the King James is still...
And he took her spot. So it's all about rewriting history. Shakespeare's doing it. King James is doing it. They're involved in kind of parallel projects.
But Shakespeare, I always thought, a very canny operator because he does manage to survive regimes.
He is slick. He writes a play like Macbeth and gives King James a cameo in the middle of it, even though it's a play about the killing of a Scottish king. So these plays always cut two ways. And I'm sure King James and everybody else who thought about these plays politically left the theater scratching heads.
I have to ask you one more essential question. Why does the fool disappear in the middle of King Lear?
The best answer I can give, and it's the kind of answer that somebody who has been teaching for 30 years gets away with answering. The lessons of the fool to King Lear about his kingdom and how badly he has mismanaged his relationship to his nation and his daughter is absorbed by Lear at that point in the play. And Lear doesn't need the fool to rub it in. So the fool disappears. In a lot of ways, if you look structurally at King Lear, it's not a great play. When Shakespeare did that gut renovation of that old play, there were things in it that he couldn't quite wrestle into shape. The war in France, all this kind of stuff that didn't quite work. The beginning works great, the end works great, the great scenes, blow, winds, blow. Those are the things we remember.
Right.
But if you had to direct this play, you would not be happy.
I remember, though, seeing a couple of productions and think, boy, this is getting really lumpy. But then it becomes, to my mind, the sparest of all the plays in the end.
Yes.
We got to wrap it up, but I am curious, since we really don't know that much about the man himself, but you've spent your life studying him. Can you imagine, anyway, what it would have been like to sort of go to the bar after a performance at the Globe and hung out with Shakespeare?
I used to believe, and in 1599, I wrote, my book 59, I wrote that I tended to believe what early commentators in the 17th century said about Shakespeare. They went to his hometown and they said, what kind of guy was Shakespeare? And everybody they spoke to said, if you asked him to go out partying, in a sense, he said, I wasn't feeling well, leave me alone, a version of that. So that he wasn't a very sociable guy. This past year, they found something spectacular, which I was able to work into the book. They found a report from the early 17th century, from the Jacobean times, that Shakespeare had gone into the Tabard Inn, not far from the Globe Theatre, and carved or cut his name into the paneling, along with those of other, Richard Burbage and other actors of the time. So you get a sense, it's like going to one of these bars near Broadway where you see the posters or the signatures.
Sardi's.
Shakespeare hung out with
At
the
Sardi's.
Sardi's of his day. That was the kind of guy he probably was in London. Maybe he put on the sour face when he went back home to the provinces in
To the wife and the kids and the family, but he was having a good time, you think, when he was in London.
Which is why he always rented here and bought there.
Very good. All right, the book is The Year of Lear, Shakespeare in 1606, by our good friend James Shapiro, out from Simon & Schuster. Thanks a lot for being our guest.
Thank you so much, Susan, Mike. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Brush up your Shakespeare. Start quoting him now. Brush up your Shakespeare, and the women you will wow. Just declaim a few lines from Otella, and they'll think you're a hell of a fella.
If your blonde don't respond when you flatter her, tell her what Tony told Cleopatra.
If she fights when her clothes you are mussing,
What her clothes much ado about nothing. Brush up your Shakespeare,
and they'll all cow.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you.